Many things have changed over the years in 76.
And many things have not.
Yeah, well, when it comes to weapons, a few things definitely have.
Oh, so shotguns and pistols are finally good?
Let's not start off with cheap shots, shall we?
Cheap shots? Well, I suppose you could say that is a benefit of using pistols.
Okay, but back to the point, let's just do a deep dive into the weapons of Appalachia, and in particular, the ones you should definitely be using. And let's start things off with heavy gunner weapons, because in recent times, heavy gunner builds do seem to be at the forefront of builds in 76, and I'd say that is primarily because of the raid. And that's not a bad thing, because the raid is a great piece of content, and there are a plethora of great heavy gunner weapons. Firstly, the Gatling Plasma. It's been around a long time, and it's always been a good option for heavy gunner builds, but with the Gleaming Depths update, the Gatling Plasma got a whole bunch of new mods, which just elevated it and made it even more powerful.
Yeah, if you can actually get any of the mods and have some of your sanity left over after farming 8 million supply drops for train stations.
You have a point, but that's besides the point. The Gatling Plasma is definitely one of the go-to options for heavy gunner builds, if not the absolute go-to option at the moment. It's got a large magazine size, excellent DPS, it doesn't compete with fusion cores since it uses plasma cores, it's not locked behind gold bullion or stamps or daily ops, so it's not something that you have to grind for.
No grind? Did I not just mention the mods?
The downside, of course, is if you just spam reload, then this is not the weapon for you, because you're just going to end up with a million depleted plasma cores in your inventory, all with varying amounts of ammo left. You know what I mean if this has happened to you, and guaranteed it has at some point.
Of course it's happened to them. Lucky for them, it's not real life, because if they reloaded every time after firing 2 rounds, their commanding officer would put 2 rounds in their fucking head.
That is the only option. But regardless of that little downside, it's an excellent choice, and you can't go wrong with the Gatling Plasma. Another great option from heavy guns is the Plasma Caster, and you'll probably see this one around even more than the Gatling Plasma, particularly outside of the endgame content, and there's good reason for that. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't good enough for endgame content like the raid, but you do have to put a bit more into it than something like the Gatling Plasma. The Plasma Caster hits like a tank. Most enemies will be handled with 1 or 2 shots. Your bigger boss enemies, of course, will need a few more, but in general, because it requires so few shots to handle any situation, it's extremely efficient on ammunition. It's also basically the only heavy gun that's really geared towards and viable in VATS, whereas most heavy guns are just terrible in VATS and far too expensive. So if you go for a VATS crit build with a Plasma Caster, you'll be dishing out a lot of damage. The main drawback for the Plasma Caster is it's just very slow firing, and it has a small magazine size. So for content like the raid, it just doesn't have the best DPS, and it is also a weapon that you need to unlock with gold bullion, and that's for the weapon and its mods, which also means it's not tradable. So if you want it, you just have to put in the work and get it yourself.
Bold statement. That's quite opposite to most gamers nowadays.
Valid points, but you're not going to be the People's Award choice now, are you?
The truth hurts.
Another excellent choice from the heavy guns is the Flamer, and it's hard to argue against the Flamer. Long has it been an unstoppable machine of war, and it gets the same reaction in every game. Firstly, it's just a lot of fun because it's a Flamer, but it only takes small little bursts to deal with enemies, so it can actually be very efficient on ammunition. It's got great DPS, and for 2 of the raid encounters, it's basically the go-to weapon. It's not locked behind an insane grind, and it's tradable, so the Flamer is definitely a weapon that you should add to your arsenal. You'll probably want the Blue Flame version because, well, blue flames are cool, and that would be the Holy Fire, a unique flamer that you can get from Beasts of Burden event, or just trade with a player for it, but it's a very, very good flamer.
What's next, the bloody RGB one?
Let's not talk about the Cremator, shall we?
What?
Now, it's not only energy heavy guns that get all the glory, there are good ballistic options as well. The Gatling gun is essentially the same as the Plasma Caster, high damage, slow fire rate, but it has a much larger magazine size, super cheap ammunition, but just not as viable in VATS. The 50 cal is also a solid middle ground, good damage, large magazine, affordable ammo. The Gauss minigun is very much on par with the Gatling Plasma, but it does fall behind a little bit in damage, and especially with the Gatling Plasma's latest mods, it's not beating it, but it's still an excellent choice. Great DPS, large magazine, but it's locked behind gold bullion and not tradable. As for explosives, the main go-to would be the AGL, the auto grenade launcher, Honestly, another heavy that you could get to work in VATS, but overall, great DPS. Not much is going to survive against it. The nuke launcher is the most popular unique when it comes to the AGL, but as far as I know, it's not currently obtainable and not tradable, so you're out of luck if you didn't get it when it was available.
And don't expect any friends at events if you're spamming explosive weapons.
Just avoid weapons like the harpoon gun or the cryolator or broadsider and you're fine, even though you could find unique use cases for some of those like the cryolator to freeze enemies. But next up, let's take a look at the rifleman and commando options. Firstly, the Fixer, and I mean, is it really that surprising? It's been around a long time at this point, ever since the Wild Appalachia update, and it still maintains its spot that it took from the Handmade when it comes to commando builds, and particularly Stealth Commando. And the reason why it comes out on top as the best option is due to its built-in effects. You get better stealth in shadows, faster move speed when sneaking, and just a flat 20% increased damage thrown on top. The first two benefits aren't really anything special, but a straight-up damage boost is hard to argue against.
There's an argument for the Handmade though. If you're not using that, then the Fixer is terrible to use. With its recoil, the Handmade is way more stable. And if you're not a stealth build, then it does lose much of its built-in effects.
True, but that 20% increased damage is just a very useful, especially if you're not a stealth build and going for something like a full health build instead, because you want every little bit of damage you can get then. It's also not the hardest weapon to get a hold of. It can be traded and bought from other players, and the plan drops from the encrypted event, which is pretty active in recent times since it gives a nice chunk of legendary modules. So if you aren't lucky in getting the plan to drop from that, there's plenty of players selling it as well. So if you're a commando build, and particularly a stealth commando, then look no further than the Fixer. The Handmade is an excellent choice and is actually my favorite when it comes to commando weapons. I prefer the look of it. It's way more stable than the Fixer, so for non-VATS builds, it handles much better. But otherwise, they're very similar, both of them as well. You can change to be non-automatic, so for rifleman builds, they also work, and the Handmade is probably easier to get a hold of as well since it's not tied to a particular event. Another commando weapon that you'll come across and definitely hear is the railway rifle, the good old choo-choo. Why do we call it choo-choo? That's pretty self-explanatory. But it hits like a tank even after some of the recent adjustments that it went through. Just don't try and use this thing outside of VATS. This is very much a weapon that you want in VATS. It has a small magazine size but really high damage output and fast fire rate. So the magazine size doesn't really matter too much. Definitely give it a try. As for straight up rifles, the top choice I'd say here is probably something like the Gauss rifle. Now it is a Gauss weapon, so that does mean that it requires the charge up for a fully powered shot, but this thing hits super hard. You can turn this into a one-shot kill king, and for a rifle weapon, you want something that's going to hit as hard as possible. Speed is not really a concern here. These are not going to be DPS weapons, but it's pretty easy to obtain, it's tradable, looks really cool, so definitely give it a try if you haven't already. As for a ballistic option, the lever action is a great choice. It hits hard, but also has a decent fire rate due to its lever action and nature. Both of these also work for stealth builds, by the way, so in case you were wondering. But the lever action, definitely a fun and cool weapon. It will serve you well if rifleman is the pathway that you want to choose. The other pure rifleman options I just don't really rate that much. The hunting rifle should be better than it is, but sadly isn't. The black powder weapons are just far too slow to be viable. And yeah, they hit hard, but so do other options. The dragon, just display that if you want anything to do with it. But now for a little bit of melee.
Wait, there's actually a good melee weapon?
Of course there's good melee weapons.
Let me rephrase. So there's a melee weapon worthy enough to mention that isn't automatic.
Shut up. The Auto Axe, particularly devastating since the Gleaming Depths update launched due to the Pounder's legendary effect being bugged and doing way more damage than intended.
Bugs? Never Bethesda game? Never.
But even without the bugged Pounders, which will eventually get patched anyway, the Auto Axe is still an absolutely amazing choice. Extremely good damage and of course DPS. It's melee, so no ammo to worry about. It works both in power armor and regular armor builds. It's got a bunch of mod options. It's the king of automatic melee weapons. Now the one downside is that if you didn't unlock it when it first released in the pit update, you will have to grind for stamps to be able to purchase it from Giuseppe at the White Springs. You can also get the Auto Axe from the Atomic Shop as it's sold there on the odd occasion for like 700 atoms, so that is another way to obtain it.
Oh yay, microtransactions. Don't forget to buy the bloody horse armor along with it.
Besides those valid points, the Auto Axe is just an insanely good weapon, so if you put in the time to grind for it, you won't be disappointed. And yes, in the meantime, if you don't have access to it, The chainsaw is essentially the same thing, so just grab that and use that instead. As for the rest of the melee weapons,
Yeah, come on, what are you going to recommend? Don't forget to tell them that the melee combat has essentially stayed the same ever since Morrowind, because that's a selling point and positive, right?
if you insist on using melee, then just go for something like the plasma cutter, the warglaive, or unarmed options like the deathclaw gauntlet. Just don't expect to be of much use at any of the endgame content or boss fights, but for regular run-of-the-mill enemies and chill gameplay sessions, sure, you can get away with melee.
Cue the angry melee mob in the comment section.
Yeah, but they're melee, what are they gonna do? Next up, pistols, guerrilla, and gunslinger builds. Now, while they may not be the most powerful weapons in the game, I do actually rank them pretty high in terms of fun, and you have some really awesome options.
Yeah, huff that copium.
There's 4 options here that I think are actually viable and will manage content just fine. Firstly, the Crusader pistol. Looks really cool, has some really interesting mod options like Pyro and Cryo. It has solid damage, it'll definitely put in the work for you. Now it isn't tradable, so you will have to get it from daily ops, or if Minerva is around and selling the plans, so it does require a bit of a grind, but if you do have it, then definitely try it out because it is fun to use. It is only for gunslingers as there's no automatic options for it, so keep that in mind. Another gunslinger exclusive option is the Gauss pistol. So, very much like the Gauss rifle, it doesn't need its shots to be charged up for maximum damage, but it does have very good damage. It is also not tradable and needs gold bullion to unlock it, and I'm now just realizing that the 2 great options are grinds. Yeah, pistol users, I'm sorry, but we do have another option being the good old 10mm. Easy to obtain, super cheap ammunition, auto and non-auto, stealth and non-stealth. It'll do everything you need it to. Its damage is decent, but nothing to rave about. The 10mm just puts in the work. And last but not least, the Gamma Gun. A very unique choice to go for, but actually very good damage. You can also use this in auto and non-auto. Its main downside is ammunition, which is expensive. Super tiny magazine size, but nonetheless, it's still a really cool option. And if you need to bloody yourself, it serves that purpose very well as well. Overall, though, you don't see too many pistol users out there just because there are better options, and hey, you might as well just go for those other weapons. But hey, at least pistols aren't as bad as shotguns. And speaking of shotguns, I mean, you can use them if you want. The only really good option that you ever had was the Gauss shotgun, which rubber banded between being absolutely overpowered and ridiculously underpowered, and for a while now it's been pretty lackluster, which leaves just one option, which is actually a pretty damn good option, and that is the Cold Shoulder. It's a unique double barrel shotgun with a bunch of built-in effects. The Cold Shoulder will serve you very well. The only downside is that it's still a shotgun, so you don't have any access to an armor penetration per card. It's got the short range, and if you didn't unlock it when it was part of the season rewards, then you're gonna have to grind out a lot of stamps for it, or grab it in the atomic shop like the Auto Axe when it makes an appearance there from time to time. But moving on to my favorite section, the unique section, and this is just to mention some weapons that may be a bit newer or serve very specific purposes. Starting off, we have the minigun shredder, which is my absolute favorite weapon in the game and the weapon I've used for thousands of hours. A mod, you chuck on the minigun, you just spin and win. No ammo required, paired with Vampire's effect, and you have constant healing, so you never have to worry about stim packs or go for anti-armor for great damage, even though it already has awesome damage. Just get the Basher perk card and bash in as the secondary legendary star, and you'll never need anything else. The Tesla cannon from the later season is also a really unique and awesome heavy gun option, but it also comes with a mod that decreases an enemy's damage resistance. So for starting off fights, particularly like in the raid, it's a great way to get everyone doing more damage straight off the bat. You can also do the same thing with the Syringer and the Endanger All mod. The laser carbine from the Caravans update is also really cool. It's a commando option, large magazine size, good damage. It looks cool, just no stealth option. And you have to grind caravans, which most people aren't exactly keen on doing, but at least it's tradable, so give it a try if you can find one. And the Tesla rifle, the king of event weapons where you just want to tag everything to get as much loot and XP as possible. Plus, on a side note, it's actually pretty good just as a straight up weapon as well, so you have plenty of options. Now, I'm sure there'll be more weapons added in the future and hopefully more reworks and updates, but for now, this list should keep you going for a long time in 76. If you have a weapon that you swear by and never put down, then let me know in the comments. But for now, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.